Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Spotlight on Security Tech Insights. My name is Shelly Calhoun-Jones and I'm a principal technologist here at Cohesity. Today we're joined by Mustafa Mustafa. Mustafa, would you like to give an introduction?
Thanks, Shelly. Hi, everyone. I work for Cisco. I'm a solutions engineering manager for XDR across EMEA. So I kind of primarily look after from the engineering side, sales engineering side, the XDR product.
Mustafa, I'm real excited to have you here today. Just for the rest of the audience, in this episode, we're going to be discussing how you can enhance incident response by utilizing an XDR solution. And this stands for Extended Detection and Response. So for a lot of companies out there, they're dealing with challenges with the ever-evolving threat landscape, whether they work within a multi-cloud environment or perhaps they're still supporting on-prem workloads. So in this episode, we're going to delve into how an XDR solution like Cisco can help unify your security operations, provide teams with advanced threat hunting capabilities, and streamlined response with security automation. Mustafa, can you explain how an XDR solution differs from traditional cybersecurity?
Yep. So, when we look at extended detection and response, right, it's kind of an advanced cybersecurity approach that kind of provides that comprehensive threat detection, investigation, those response capabilities across those multiple different layers of security. It just goes beyond that traditional security solution, right? So if we look at something where things are siloed, right, you have customers, organizations that purchase a certain product to solve a certain problem, right? So that might be a firewall, intrusion detection system, an IPS, and so forth. And then it becomes very kind of that manual correlated effort to try and bring all those different silo solutions together, limited scope, and then it becomes very reactive. You get a ton of alerts coming in, and it becomes complex to manage. So now we've just created that scenario that we all dread as a SOC analyst or something like that. Ultimately, extended detection and response's approach is about bringing together kind of like an integrated platform, so that you can pull in multiple security components into one kind of go-to platform in case of, that unification process. In case of, if something was to go wrong, that might be a threat that's coming through the door, or even just to give you that visibility, that unified visibility, right? So there's different approaches to it, but ultimately what it helps to bring together is an integrated platform, great correlation in an automated way, unifying your visibility, and being proactive about how we go after, for example, behavioral-based detection, right? So we're looking at things like machine learning, behavior-based detection methods, like to proactively hunt and respond to those sophisticated threats that we just haven't seen before, because we're adding context now from different places to build a better picture. That ultimately then starts to solve those issues that we just talked about, which is around reducing that alert fatigue, trying to simplify management, and ultimately what is really nice about XDR is the automated response. So whereas a SOC analyst would have to go in and try to figure out, okay, how do I deal with this threat? What do I need to do? What's a playbook on this, right? Now you can upload automated playbooks, or the system can actually kick in retrospectively to put something out, and that might be in multiple different places. It might be on the endpoint, it might be on the cloud, it might be even a workload, right, like a Lambda function or something like that. So there's different things, but as you can see, it kind of takes a lot of the complexities out of a typical SOC environment that we see today. That, quite frankly, we as an industry, right, but also from a vendor perspective, and our buying patterns of our customers, and obviously the threat landscape that we're seeing, become quite overly complicated, and that's what XDR is trying to solve.
Right. No, that's a really good point that you bring about with alert fatigue. And for a lot of organizations, if you're dealing with a new threat, you may want to have a different workflow that you use to respond to it versus something that's lower severity, where you may want to incorporate more automation into it. So I really like how you mentioned Lambda functions. For those of you that have not heard of Lambda, this is basically a function as a service. It's an example of how you can automate workflows within the AWS platform. There's a lot of really good examples out there of different templates that you can download, which can help get you started with it. But yeah, I love how you mentioned that, with a lot of companies out there, they may be dealing with different vendor solutions. Yeah. So having a unified interface that you can use to respond is really going to help cut down the learning factor. Now, kind of to circle back to that traditional security architecture, we've talked a lot with customers about how, they could be dealing with perimeter security, endpoint security, network security. So you have to think of security at all different layers. And so for a lot of companies out there, they could be dealing with their own IAM solution. They could have their own data loss prevention product, maybe a SIEM solution for, aggregating all of those logs and consolidating everything together, along with your traditional endpoint detection and response. Now, Mustafa, what are the primary components that you can think of that are typically included in an XDR solution, and how do you think they work together to help enhance security?
So I think it's a good question, because there's different ways to look at it. There's the Cisco approach, which is looking at it from NDR and then moving into an XDR, right? Which is network detection and response. And then there's other vendors that go from EDR and then become XDR, right? Mm-hmm. And what ultimately what it is with it, I think when you talk about extended detection and response as a whole, there's different elements to it. So there's the endpoint perspective, right? Which is going to be your, like your secure clients, your CrowdStrikes, and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. And your McAfee and all those guys. And then you have your network traffic analytics, which is going to be your NDR, which is network detection and response. That's going to be things like secure network analytics, or it's going to be things along the lines of like Vectra and things like that. So I think what's important is those two elements, right, are good foundation for XDR as a first step. Right. If you're looking at an XDR platform, you need to be thinking about, right, I need to have the EDR, because you need the EDR to actually make and remediate those threats that are on the endpoint. Great, right? And it also gives you the visibility on the endpoint. But also at the same time, you need to remember that as it travels across the network, right, the visibility you add on the endpoint is no longer there. The visibility has gone across the network. And the network, the nice thing about the network is it never lies. The network is a piece that basically shows you where that threat has gone, right? Yeah. Whereas on an endpoint, you can actually, as an attacker, you can actually wipe your tracks, or you can use like clever tactics like lay of the land, so you can leverage something like PowerShell, things that are trying to do some evasion, should we say, of detection. Whereas once it goes over the network, which ultimately the threat needs to do to actually live and move forward to the next step, right, of that attack chain, it goes over the network. And from a Cisco perspective, when you use something like Cisco XDR, NDR is actually included. So the customer doesn't really need to think about, okay, well, I need an NDR solution now to bolt this in. It's actually, it comes included in that. And that helps pick up those kind of intrusions, malicious activities across the network, data exfiltration and so forth. Ultimately, then once you have the endpoint or the NDR, whichever method you want to go with, you then start to look at things like email security, because obviously email security, again, gives so much data. We just look at email today and we just think, oh, it's just an email. But there's so much data points on an email, it's unbelievable. So, for example, it gives you the DNS information, URL information. It gives you the things around the file size. Is there malicious data inside the file? Where does it come from? all of those different, there's like about 50, 60 different data points you can actually leverage and push that into your XDR.
Yeah.
You've got cloud security, because as we know today, that traditional application, database, the front end, that 3-tier that we all kind of learned of, should we say, back in the past, has now, traditionally kind of all been federated across different multiple environments. You could send a command and it would go to something like, for example, where you can't put endpoint detection onto. So like you just said, the Lambda function on AWS or Kubernetes, for example, those things are completely running on the fly. And that's where you need something like the network traffic analytics and actually the cloud security logs and so forth to help bolster all of those that enhance the security of the XDR solution. I think the interesting thing that we're seeing quite a lot of now is the additional data points that we never typically thought about. So, for example, identity and access management, being able to figure out the user, adding user behavior and analytics to it. So, for example, this user logged in at 3 a.m. right, from a location which they've never logged in before. So, for example, they might logged in from, I don't know, let's say Dubai, but their normal work location is in the UK, and most of the times they're logging out of London.
Right.
Those things are starting to come about now, because the more intelligence and the more context you can bring with the data, the much more actionable intelligence you have, right? And you start to reduce those false positives, and then things become much more prioritized on those responses, because we want to try and reduce that. Bringing all of those different siloed technologies like DLP, IAM, cloud, helps to bring a kind of a unified data collection, right? So we start to collect, consolidate data, we start to correlate that data, and then we add lots of cool, I know it's the buzzwords at the moment, but lots of AI on top of that, right? And the way I look at it is, what by doing all of that, what XDR does, and to be honest, actually, let me just take a step back. In the past, what we've done is, when we're looking for threats, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, right? We're trying to find that needle in the haystack, which is a very complex thing to do. But now what we've done, we've completely changed things around, and we're actually looking at the haystack for any anomalies, so that the needles will just come out. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? So it's just enhancing that visibility. And then you have now something where before, in order to ultimately and effectively look across the attack chain, you're now starting to go, right, okay, I need a workflow built in and orchestrate that workflow across different vendors, different products, and different vectors. And that's ultimately what they're doing by enhancing that security playbooks.
It sounds almost like they're streaming in threat intelligence from different sources. So you're streaming in threat intelligence from your endpoints, your networks, from other cloud environments. Can you shed any more light on how an XDR solution uses that data integration and correlation to enhance its ability to rapidly respond to new threats?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's obviously a kind of a wide array, right? So I think if you were to break it down into different kind of bullets, right? Let's take that bullet points. Let's just say data integration. So that would be integrating data from various security components from the data perspective. So that be endpoint, network security tools like firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, email security, cloud security tools, right? And then once you have all that data, it's great, but you've got to normalize the data then. So now you've got to think about, okay, I've gathered this data, it's all in different formats and in different contexts. How do I normalize this data? And that's ultimately what the XDR solution must do, right? It's got to be able to, out of the box, right? We've gone past the days of where we want advanced services to add bits in and bolts in, and things change, and the business priorities change, which means we need to rip it out, and it becomes very painful. It's really the thought process behind that just doesn't exist anymore. The system has to actually normalize that data, standardize the structure for consistent processing and analysis, because it's got to be quick, right? We've got to get that enrichment really, really quick. And then once you have that data enrichment and you've collected that data, and that might be things like malicious IP addresses, domains, file hashes, threat actor tactics, techniques, procedures, all the TTPs, right? It's overlaying that and saying, right, what is trying to distinguish between the false positives and the genuine threats. And that ultimately then boils down to correlation analytics, looking for those patterns and so forth, things like suspicious login attempts and a coordinated attack on that. So ultimately, you then, once you've started to bring those points down, you then begin your automated response, your incident investigation and remediation, and then you continually improve that over time, because obviously the system needs to learn, improve their detection algorithms over time, but also the engineers as well. It's a constant learning process, right? It's not something where you can just go, right, I stop here now. And at Cisco, we've got a famous saying: security is a journey, and it is a constant learning curve, and that is the truth.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, your security policies are living documents. You're forever going in there and tightening them down, making sure that you have the right level of security. So it's a really good mantra to have. Well, let's imagine that we recently just experienced a security event, and our leadership is wanting us to go in, make sure that we've taken any proactive measures to identify any suspicious activity or maybe other threats that we may have missed. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But we could be going in, we could be looking at our logs, we could be looking at different traffic patterns. Maybe we're building a timeline of what led up to the issue, so we can go back to our leadership and say, well, we need to go in and make some improvements within our environment to make sure that we're protected from future events. Now, from a threat hunting perspective, can you share any best practices and how an XDR solution could help with proactive threat hunting?
Yeah, so that's a good point, because I think there's two ways to look at this, right? There's the best practices for threat hunting, right, without using tooling, and then there's the best practices for threat hunting, which XDR can help support. Right. So let's start with the best practices for threat hunting in kind of general, right, irrespective of the tooling that you use, right? We've got to have a hypothesis-based knowledge of the current threat landscape, right? It's a bit like a car, right? I mean, you can jump in the car and you can start driving, but if you've never driven a car before, you don't understand the rules of the road. It becomes a little bit more challenging, and that's the same case with a solution or looking at security-based threats or anomalies. You've got to really understand what is the data that you're looking at. What are you trying to pull out of the data, right? And leveraging, for example, and overlaying that information against threat intelligence. So the MITRE framework, for example, the techniques, the tactics, and the procedures. I mean, that has really helped simplify the attack chain when we're looking at data, because again, it's not just about the vendor. You're looking at an entire attack chain, which happens right across different products. Right. So being able to have a hypothesis-driven approach, leverage threat intelligence, right? And then ultimately, now you're starting to comprehensively look at data collection. So gather data from the endpoints, the network, the cloud. I've been doing this. I've been in security for a very long time now. It must be going on 14 years. And the one saying that I always say is, context is everything in security, and it really does matter, right? Because I think there is. The more data you can collect, and I'm not talking about just collecting any type of data. It has to be the level of data that's coming in. You have to have action and intelligence against, right? So there's no point collecting, for example, log data if, for example, no one's actually logging into the domain or no one's actually logging into anything, or there's no point collecting endpoint data if you don't have any endpoints in your environment and you're completely using a service-based application running off some VDU console or something like that. The data has to be comprehensive enough that you can actually actionize that data and do something with it. You ultimately then start to overlay a lot of that data now that you have with advanced analytics that we're seeing, right? And a lot of the tool sets within XDR have all the cool AI that you can leverage, and it makes the job simpler, right? It starts to really cut things down. The thing is, though, when you're continually looking for those threat hunting, I think people forget that documentation is really, really key. All the findings, the methodologies, the outcomes, using this documentation to refine the threat hunting strategy, share lessons, and learned across the security teams, right? Red or blue, it really does help. And then I think the last thing here is on the best practice for threat hunting is probably doing regular hunting exercises, so that people are prepared, right? It's not a case of we've been breached and now we need to do it. It should be a case of we've been breached and we know what we need to do. We know who's doing what in this role, and what needs to be done. Now, if you flip that from the best practices of threat hunting, and then you say to yourself, right, how does XDR, the tooling, for example, Cisco XDR, for example, provide that threat hunting? Well, ultimately, what you do is you start to centralize your data view because you're now aggregating a lot of the data, right? You improve data contextualization because you're looking at the bigger picture of all the abnormal behavior. Think about it today, like I was saying, it's not about looking for the needle in the haystack anymore. It's actually now looking at the variance of the haystack. So where what in the haystack is actually looking weird? What is it that is actually looking like it shouldn't be there? That just saying that right, it just shows you how simplified things have become from Cisco XDR. And then starting to do the enhanced detection capabilities, the threat intel intelligence integration, pulling together. It's not just a case of, and this is the one thing as well, right? It's about context. It's not just pulling together Cisco threat intel. You should be pulling into things from VirusTotal, for example,
right,
or Showdown, for example, right? Or even from different vendors, right? Being able to correlate all that threat intel, you're much more better prepared now than you were with, for example, one data stream of intel.
And depending on the size of your organization, you may have
Yep.
your own custom threat intelligence feed that you want to pull in. So
correct. So exactly, and that brings me to a point, for example, like government organizations, right? Or for example, like local government, things like that. They have their own threat intel that they do, and they share amongst the smaller governmental organizations as well. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of. I think the thing is really starting to see once you have that intel, trying to respond to it. Right? How quick can you respond to it? How quick can you query, investigate, and then do a response to it? And we see a lot of stuff like where today you can have like things like automated playbooks. So if this threat keeps happening, instead of an analyst going in and saying, right, I need to do this and click this button and clean this up and clean this, you ultimately now what you basically go, right, this playbook needs to automate when it sees this variance in the environment, or when this alert is detected, take this action, basically. So it's continually improving as well going forward.
It kind of makes me think of like the CI/CD pipelines that you see in a lot of development organizations. You're basically rolling something like that out within the security operations environment so that you have the ability to create new workflows, test them out, make sure they work as expected, and then roll them out to production. It's like you're doing game day exercises, but you're doing it more from an automation perspective.
Correct. Yeah.
Speaking of which, can you share a little bit more on how automation could help with streamlining incident response?
Yeah, I think here it's really it's about triaging, right? It's about being able to automatically triage the alerts, categorize and prioritize them based on a predefined criteria, such as severity, reliability, or potential impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there is elements of it where it can help reduce the noise from the false positives, because you continually just sometimes get overwhelmed with what's going on. Imagine you have like thousands of things in the environment, right? Thousands of devices all talking and feeding data in. So it really helps to kind of automate the alert triage, which is what the tools are doing today.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you integrate that threat intel, you can automatically incorporate all of that, enrich the alerts with context, for example, like malicious IPs, domains, file hashes, and things like that. So being able to automate, integrate, and then overlay a lot of the behavioral analytics, anomaly detections, to utilize machine learning and so forth. That ultimately is a key aspect of it. The other thing is instead of taking automated or the SOC analyst, let's say, taking an automated response, right, saying, right, I know what this is, I need to take this action here. Sometimes those elements of it are missed. And that's why it's great to automate it, because there's a set procedure and a set task that has been done, and things are going to be taken in real time. Whereas it could happen in the spur of the moment, and an analyst forgets to do something, or forgets to block a port, or even it could be that case it actually happens at 3:00 in the morning, right? Could be that SOC 2 analyst that's in charge of that certain process or a certain workflow. I hope not, but it does happen. Is on that workflow is asleep. We have to wake him up or her up, and then try and actually then action that intelligence. Sometimes it's not quick enough. And especially when you have things like ransomware in the environment,
Right.
where it starts to spread very, very quickly. By the time you get into the office, 50% of it is already, the damage has been done. So being able to automate that in an effective predefined policy, it's brilliant, because you start to really isolate the compromised devices, terminate a malicious process, block a malicious traffic, quarantine files. That you really start to stop the attackers in their tracks before they can cause any significant damage. And the other thing is when you start to automate, the attacker realizes that they're not facing, there are policies in place which are stopping them from moving forward. So they might have they might even start to second guess now, think, is it really worth it, me trying to go forward with this? Because these guys have quite a good process in place, and it's all automated. So every step I take going forward, or try and hide, or try and go for a different port or whatever, it's all being blocked and stopped, which is also key to that continuous improvement in that post-incident analysis, when you start to look back on what you've learned from that every incident, really.
Oh, this is great information. Yeah, so really, based off of kind of what we discussed, it sounds like implementing an XDR solution is going to help improve threat detection. It's going to help you respond to new incidents faster, preventing attackers moving laterally through the network. And also then you'll have the added benefit of streamlining your business operations, because you have the ability to respond more rapidly. Now, a good example of this would be Cisco XDR, which is where you work, Mustafa. But also we have a new integration here at Cohesity, which allows you to isolate systems that could be infected. And so what this does is it allows your security operations team, help keep that environment safe as you respond. Mustafa, is there any key takeaways that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just actually on that last point you made on the integration with Cohesity, I think that is really the next step in kind of the evolution of XDR plus recovery, right? Ultimately, what you're doing there is you are preventing data loss very, very quickly in an automated response, right? And I think we sometimes forget that there is, it's not a case of companies will be breached. It doesn't matter how great the tooling is. There are, no security solution is 99% effective, but you can do a really, really good job at protecting yourself. The thing to note is that you can go a step further now. And if ransomware does get in the environment, and if we are slow to respond to something like that, you've got a good recovery process in place now with Cohesity in an automated way, so that you can your data is protected. There might be one or two endpoints that get affected in the process, but at the end of the day, your data is protected, that you can bring your service back online within literally seconds, which is great. I think that in summary, though, the strength of the XDR solution lies in its ability to integrate, correlate data across various security layers, providing that kind of more holistic view of the organization's security posture. By doing so, it can detect that complex, sophisticated threats more accurately and respond to them more effectively. And I just think that XDR is kind of that representative and an evolution in cybersecurity, moving away from that siloed and that reactive approach towards a more kind of integrated, proactive, and automated system. And it really does enhance the threat detection, speeds up response times, and reduces the complexity of managing security solutions across various domains.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for your time. For the audience, we have the Cohesity Data Protect and Data Hawk services. Combined with Cisco XDR, you can go out, you can download the integration from the Cohesity marketplace. You can also learn more about the integration both on Cohesity and Cisco.com, so definitely check that out. But the end goal is to make sure that we have the ability to detect and back up your data in real time, helping minimize data loss and also minimize business disruption. So real excited about that new integration and partnership with Cisco. Do recommend checking that out. And this wraps up another episode of Cohesity Tech Insights. Thanks for watching, everyone.